Welcome to the Cheryl Lacey Show, where curiosity meets courage, and I'm so glad you're here today. Right now, we have got Dr. Paul Tees. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning to you, and good morning to your viewers. What an outstanding show this morning. Well done.
Thank you. Look, it's always busy, and Paul, I'm not sure if you're speaking right into your phone there. It might be handy if you do that, if you could. It is a busy show, and I am looking forward to it very much. There's always something, Paul, as you well know, as educationists, the one thing we must be, that is dedicated to learning ourselves. Would you agree?
I agree, absolutely.
And do you think that's part of the issue regarding our educationists? There's a bit of a gap in the desire to learn and think critically, because that may mean that they have to have a critical look at themselves?
I agree, Cheryl. One of the issues with underperformance is the nervousness or anxiousness or hesitancy of leaders to call it or name it. To say to a teacher, early career, mid-career or late, that, look, there's some aspects of your teaching and learning, your approach to management that need to be developed or need to be improved. There's a reluctance to do that because of the, impact on the individual's well-being and how they might take that and might view that as criticism. So to me, that's one of the big problems, is people are just reluctant to call it or name it for what it is. That'd be the start. The second point is, yes, the approach to leaders' self-development themselves and the modelling they show for others by making very visible that they are actively engaged in their own development and growth as leaders, and that can be infectious to the teachers and middle leaders in schools when they see their executive leaders demonstrating that very visibly.
Now let's take a step back for our listeners. The courses that students take to become educators, we're talking about in schools, and we're talking about schools right across the board, be it government, Catholic, independent, etc. What sort of qualifications do you think or studies do you think are missing if we've got this mindset that goes right across the sector?
I would say it starts with the universities themselves and the rigour in their programs. Now, let's just talk about a master's course in teaching. Students left year 12, they go into a master's or a bachelor's degree in teaching. And I think fundamentally one of the problems with that is students can move through those courses without robust assessment, rigorous evaluation of their readiness and their capability, and an awful lot of theoretical work around, pedagogy and so on, rather than in-school practice. So that would be one of the problems, I think, with our courses, is it's too easy to move through university degree programs, and teachers coming out the other side have got to be rigorously assessed as suitable. And the other problem is that the dearth of teachers, they're just not available. The graduates from school don't want to go into teaching, and so we have this problem where there are no teachers to fill the need. And so therefore everyone relaxes a little bit around their standards, for otherwise creating a real problem for availability of teachers.
So we've got poor preparation that filters into the school itself, and because of that poor preparation, there's a culture of acceptance of not quite being up to scratch, which is forgiven because there is a teacher shortage, and ultimately society suffers. What would be something that we could do immediately, because we're talking entire systemic change? What would something be that could be done immediately for parents, grandparents, families to feel more confident about what you're talking about here is essentially a dysfunctional system?
Absolutely. Look, clean up schooling in this country, okay? If students attending school feel engaged, part of belonging into a community of educators and learners, they get great opportunities, high quality teaching, excellent infrastructure and facilities. If that's their experience at school, they're far more likely to want to go on and become a teacher than looking at burned out teachers, teachers who find it hard to maintain the energy and enthusiasm they need to be great teachers. So the system is failing in terms of inspiring and motivating graduates. So what did they go and do, Cheryl? They go and do a whole range of other courses that are more glamorous, that don't seem to have the same emotional toll on teachers. So that one thing, we could just fix our education system so that it was inspiring. That's unlikely to happen, Cheryl. Of the school resourcing standard, the SRS, which is the baseline funding that the government has determined provides a quality education for kids, that's far too low. Why it's too low is because the government won't lift its overall education budget. So I think clean up education in this country so that it is seen by kids as a great occupational vocation.
Look, you're saying a couple of things there. First of all, the SRS, the School Resource Standard, now many families may not know what that is, and that is the funding that is allocated to each student regardless of where they live or where they attend school.
Yes.
And then there are adjustments made to that accordingly, again, based on where they are, their family background, other issues. So what we're saying is that we have a government or multiple governments or governance system that we inherited from the 1800s right around Australia, based on a Victorian model that has the government control the amount of funding that schools receive. Now, how do we expect a system to change if we are making demands and expectations of government to provide for us without us actually taking responsibility? We've got our hands out all the time. So how do you fix that system?
I think one is voice. One is that people in leadership in schools and across sectors are strong in their voice around what are the needs. Now, you're right, throwing more money at a system won't necessarily change, but fundamentally, if that's an impoverished system that we have, there has to be some, increased allocation of funding, particularly in areas like, individual needs, special provision, student programs, where we build a team of a team of non-teachers, for example, specialists who can intervene and support kids so they are engaged in learning. I mean, that's up to the leaders in the systems to show some voice and not this sort of almost resigned view that, well, we can't change the system, so we'll just have to do our best with it. And so that comes to your earlier point. Well, we can still make some changes with what we have. And I think that's a lack of courageous leadership, generally speaking, to tackle the issues, surface them, and actually come up with actions and strategies and remedies to improve overall. Now, it sounds like we're giving the whole teaching profession a bit of a caning this morning. So that's not our intention, but the system is not keeping pace with what quality teachers need in 2026.
Well, we're talking about, you make some interesting points. We're talking about the system, but the system is its people. And its people are its educators. And those influencing educators are making decisions about the profession. When we look at schools and schooling, which we are discussing here, and we are talking about the underperformance of teachers, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure all of my listeners would know, as would you, and I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek here, that the person in front of the students is the teacher. So what's happening in Canberra and what's happening in the classroom are chalk and cheese, and they're two different things, and they certainly never really marry. Ultimately, the responsibility is on the teacher to do their job. I liken it to something as simple as going into a sandwich bar and getting served stale bread. You don't say, gee, the bread was left out in the sun. You do something about it because you're the one that's made the sandwich and selling it. So there must be local accountability in every school across the country rather than this, the system's the problem.
Well, look, I use the the metaphor of sport. So let's just take, for example, AFL would be probably common to your readers, or National Rugby League, whatever it might be. You could assemble a brilliant team who know how to do their work. They've got skill development. The coach is on top of the game. But if the office, the CEO and the board and the office and all of those paraprofessionals that support can't do their job because they're under-resourced or there's poor, organisational design or whatever it is, that team won't perform. So those players can't be at their best unless that organisational design that backs and supports them is a peak performer as well. So that's how I see the teaching thing. We can have high-quality teachers ready to go, been wanting to become teachers since they were kids, and they've got teachers, they've got some middle-layer leadership that's strong, but if the system itself isn't supporting their development, their capacity to teach and building their capacity to deal with challenging kids, teachers can't do their job well. That's how I see the system at play.
Which means we really have to stay on task, as we are trying to do now with underperformance of teachers, because we know that a system is made up of many different parts, but the system itself as a whole has its own identity as a result of that. So tackling bits isn't sufficient. So I go back to your point, and you're right, it has to be the entire system. But again, that comes back to its people. So from that context, if a teacher comes in, they are underperforming, and then you've again brought in funding, they're under-resourced, the school itself is offering services it's not capable of offering. Why do schools keep saying this is what we offer when they don't have the resources and they don't have the staff qualified to deliver on those promises?
That's a precarious position for a school to put itself in. Schools where I led and that I know are leading, and that's again the independent school context, schools will be very careful about what they say they can deliver if they can't, because if there's a gap between the promise and the delivery, that's going to affect the reputation of that school, cause parents to look elsewhere. So I think the over-promising is a risk. I don't know what happens across other sectors in the public school system about what sorts of claims are being made about the quality education outcomes, but that's fraught with risk, Cheryl, if that's an approach schools are taking. So schools have to have a strong understanding of who they are, what value are they adding to a child's growth and development and learning, what can they provide in terms of a holistic education, whatever it might be. If they're going to say we've got innovation and technology, well, they jolly will need to have it. But that's where schools have to know who they are, what their SES, or socioeconomic, the demography they serve, what are parents wanting from them, and deliver on it. Yes, that's leadership. That's where the principal and or the board and or the executive team have to be tuned in for what the community wants. So
what can parents do when they find that there is that underperformance? And it doesn't take long in a school system, and when I say system, I'm not talking this system at large, I'm talking within a school itself. You've got, your various year levels and different, departments and so forth, and that particular system doesn't take long for word to get around. And that is problematic as well, isn't it? Because then, you're prone to rumour and tribalism and all those things, which we don't want to see in communities, let's be fair. So it's not fair on anybody. What would parents be able to do, however, if they did find out and there was evidence of underperformance? How do they tackle that?
Yeah, well, rights and responsibilities, it's the right of a family to have a good education. And that means that parents have a role to play, and that's recognised and acknowledged. The responsibility then on the parents' shoulders is if they're not happy, if the expectations they have of the school through either the school's profile or generally what they expect from an education in a country like Australia, they should have a voice. If they think there's poor performance in the classroom, and children aren't getting the learning that they feel they should, then yes, they must make a meeting, go to the school, share their concerns. We don't need them to set up a WhatsApp app or create a petition or silly things like this, but parents mobilising and exercising their voice with key leaders in the school, done in a constructive way, is small but important. And then if there's enough parents in a similar position, so to me, Cheryl, rights and responsibility. Right to a quality education. Responsibility is to use their voice if they don't feel that's happening in their own child's case. And that can be hard. Sorry, Cheryl, just one quick point. Because parents have to go into the school, into someone's office, and that's pretty intimidating. So there are other ways and means that parents can exercise their voice without necessarily putting them into that situation where they feel quite intimidated.
That's problematic in itself. You raise a good point that it can be intimidating, and there's in my view, insufficient support for families. And often, and more likely, you've got several members of staff and one parent sitting on their own. So there's always a top-heavy situation that they're dealing with as well. It really is an unfair representation. But that aside, can teachers get sacked in the private sector?
Oh yes, for sure. Yeah. So in the independent sector, they are all on contracts. So they all have contracts or agreements of appointment. Each one of those has clauses. So a new teacher, for example, to a school would be on a probation. 6-month probation, there'd be a 3-month review and check-in, 6 months then. So there's that opportunity. But they will all have clauses to deal with termination for unsatisfactory performance. It can't be an overnight decision. There'd have to be a process. So in independent schools, if a teacher's not performing, there is a process of performance management or otherwise that addresses the concerns or issues, and that just doesn't go on forever. If it's not producing the change in certain behaviours or areas of operation that you want from the teacher, then yes, termination is certainly an option.
And where do the unions fit in there? Because they'd be supported by unions if there was a problem, and clearly the goal would be not to have them sacked, but to assist them with their underperformance.
Yeah, look, the unions generally understand this, and providing there's a good process, providing, that there's early communication about a concern or issue, and there's a genuine developmental plan with appropriate supports, if it gets to the point where it's not working, by then the unions are on board as well. And so the union generally, this is my experience with unions in education, in the independent sector, is if you've got good process, quality communications, key stakeholders know the process, they're okay with that process. They won't cause you any great grief. But if you're poor in that communication, the supports are ineffectual, they're going to get a bit testy with you, and they'll exercise their right as the voice of the advocate for the teacher.
Right, just one last question, Paul. This has been invaluable for our listeners, I'm sure, to hear a little bit about the system, more about local issues, and then dealing with underperformance of teachers and a little bit of what parents can do. But you've also talked about lack of resources, lack of funding. So someone has poor performance, they need support, which requires financial investment. How does that get balanced with a school that's already under-resourced? And what does that mean for teachers who are wanting to flourish and have got great capacity to do brilliant things, but are compromised by the underperformer?
So here's the question about underperformance, say, and resourcing. Let's just look at AI. Let's take a quick one look at AI. AI is everywhere in schools, everywhere, right? It's kids are using it, teachers are using it, but I call it the shadow AI. No policies from the school, no guidelines from the school. Bureaucrats still wondering whether it's a good thing or not, don't even use it themselves probably. And that doesn't require money, right? That doesn't actually require dollars. That requires governance and leadership around the use of AI. So I think that's one of the classics whereby the system can support the school by developing clear protocols and guidelines and those sorts of things to allow its use. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's where, there can be support. But an impoverished school that has poor resources, facilities that require massive injection of money to get them up to standard, are starting from well behind. And so, as you know, those schools, the injection or otherwise of support, which might be psychological support for leaders, or it could be for families to get students at school. They're starting from so far behind. Dramatic improvements and changes are needed there, and that's where I don't think our system can sustain the levels of improvement and support that are needed.
It sounds to me, Paul, as though we need a movement from the bottom up. No government is going to make the effort to effect change to the system that is required. That goes without saying because of the political cycle, but also the incompetence of so many ministers of education. They come in with all these promises and very little happens, and if they do, they're just, putting band-aids on an already broken system. I think we need a movement from the ground up. Would you agree?
I do, but strangely, you're more savvy than me in this area, but I've yet to see education swing any government in terms of the election. I'm not. I don't
want the politicians involved. That's what I mean by ground up.
I'm saying the people. I haven't yet seen masses of subgroups in Australia make education an issue that causes a government to fall.
Yep.
I think this is the problem. What is wrong with the Australian people as a whole? Are they just fait accompli, beaten up? What's going on that they don't have an impact at election time where education gets a proper platform, I suppose, around election time?
Well, maybe that's something we need to talk about next time, Paul. We'll work out a strategy for the bottom-up approach, share it with our listeners, and get some people to call in and help us out with some ideas.
Great. I look forward to that, Cheryl.
Sounds great. Always great to have you, Paul, and it was a terrific conversation. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Paul Tees with us today, the Principal Educationist from New South Wales, discussing underperformance of teachers and all manner of things that come into play. Notice how we started off the conversation with underperformance, and it leads to so many other elements. There is nothing like having to take a look at the whole, because you fix a part, there are so many other parts broken. The Cheryl Lacey Show, where curiosity meets courage.